She did not step forward with flashing lights around her or a stage beneath her feet. There was no dramatic announcement, no press release prepared in advance, no carefully timed reveal meant to dominate headlines. When Elon Musk's mother finally spoke in this imagined telling, it was quiet, steady, and almost gentle, the way truth often arrives when it has nothing left to prove. Her voice did not seek attention, it carried weight because it had carried a lifetime. She spoke as a mother first, not as the parent of a famous man, not as a symbol, not as an accessory to genius. She spoke as someone who had watched a child become a boy become a man, and a man become a mirror the world kept staring into. Sometimes seeing brilliance, sometimes controversy, sometimes their own hopes reflected back at them. She did not try to correct the world's opinions. She did not argue with the narratives already written. She simply told her story, and in doing so, she changed the shape of everything people thought they knew. She talked about beginnings that were ordinary in ways people rarely want to hear about extraordinary people. There was no mythic birth moment, no thunderclaps signaling destiny. There was a child who asked too many questions, who stared at books longer than other children, who disappeared into thought so deeply that the world sometimes forgot he was there and he sometimes forgot the world existed at all. She described a silence around him that was not emptiness but fullness, like a room filled with ideas before words arrived to give them form. She said he was not born fearless. That surprised many in this fictional retelling, because the public often paints him as reckless, immune to doubt, immune to hesitation. She explained that fear was always there, but it took a different shape. It was not fear of failure in the usual sense. It was fear of stagnation, fear of wasted potential, fear of a world that might remain broken simply because someone chose comfort over courage. That fear drove him more than confidence ever could. She spoke about loneliness, not as a dramatic tragedy but as a constant companion. She said that when a mind moves faster than the rooms it lives in, loneliness follows naturally. Other children wanted to play, he wanted to understand. Other teenagers wanted to belong, he wanted to build. She admitted there were moments she worried, moments she wondered if brilliance came at too high a cost. She did not romanticize those moments. She let them remain complicated, unresolved, human. She revealed that discipline, not genius, was what truly shaped him. This was the part that quietly dismantled many assumptions. People wanted the story of effortless intelligence, of natural superiority. She offered instead a picture of relentless effort. Long nights, unfinished meals. Eyes red from reading, hands restless when idle. She said he learned early that ideas mean nothing without execution, and execution demands endurance. She taught him that endurance often looks boring from the outside. She talked about failure in a way that stripped it of its drama. Failure was not a catastrophe in their home, it was data. It was information pointing toward a better approach. She said he learned to sit with disappointment without letting it become identity. He learned to separate who he was from what didn't work yet. That, she suggested, was more important than any technical skill he would later acquire. She did not shy away from the darker chapters. She spoke of moments when his intensity became overwhelming. When relationships strained under the weight of his focus, when his single-mindedness hurt people he did not intend to hurt. She did not excuse these moments. She did not condemn them either. She framed them as the cost of imbalance, the reminder that vision without empathy can wound even when it aims to heal. She revealed that behind the public persona was a man deeply sensitive to criticism, even when he pretended otherwise. Words mattered to him more than he let on. Mockery lingered longer than praise. She said he developed humor not just as charm, but as armor. Wit became a shield that allowed him to engage without exposing too much of what could be bruised. She spoke about love in a way that surprised listeners in this imagined narrative. Love, she said, was never absent in his life, but it was often complicated by timing and intensity. He loved ideas the way some people love people, with total immersion. That made human love harder, not impossible, but demanding. She said he was still learning how to balance ambition with presence, how to be fully there without losing the fire that drove him forward. She addressed the myth that he wanted to save the world for recognition. She said recognition was a side effect, not a goal. What drove him, she claimed, was a discomfort with inertia. He could not accept a future that was merely an extension of the present if the present was flawed. He believed the future should be argued with, challenged, redesigned. That belief was not glamorous, it was exhausting. She revealed that he carried the weight of expectation heavily, even when he joked about it. Knowing that millions projected their hopes and frustrations onto him was not empowering, it was heavy. She said there were nights he questioned whether the effort was worth the misunderstanding, whether pushing humanity forward was worth being misunderstood by humanity itself. Those nights did not make headlines. She spoke about responsibility as something he did not seek but accepted once it arrived. Once he realized his actions could shift industries, influence policy, inspire or mislead, he felt an obligation to think bigger, act more carefully, and still move quickly. The tension between speed and responsibility was a constant battle, one with no perfect solution. She described moments of doubt that came not from external criticism but from internal exhaustion. Burnout did not announce itself loudly. It crept in quietly, disguised as productivity, disguised as momentum. She said she reminded him, sometimes unsuccessfully, that rest was not surrender, that pause was not failure. She admitted mothers can advise, but they cannot live their children's lives for them. She spoke of resilience not as toughness but as flexibility. The ability to adapt when reality refuses to cooperate. She said he learned that the universe does not reward intention, only persistence aligned with reality. Dreams had to be tested, reshaped, sometimes broken and rebuilt. That process was painful, but it was honest. She addressed critics directly, not defensively, but thoughtfully. She said disagreement was healthy, necessary even. Blind admiration was more dangerous than skepticism. What hurt was not criticism, but reduction. Reducing a complex human being to a caricature, whether hero or villain, stripped away truth. She invited people to hold multiple truths at once, that he could be visionary and flawed, inspiring and frustrating, generous and difficult. She revealed something quieter, something that truly shifted perspective in this imagined account. She said his greatest fear was not failure, not criticism, not even death. It was irrelevance in the moral sense. Not being remembered, but not having mattered. Not leaving a mark, but leaving the wrong one. He wanted to know that his efforts tilted the world, even slightly, towards something better. She spoke about legacy with caution. Legacy, she said, is often decided by people who arrive after you are gone, people who simplify stories to make them easier to tell. She hoped her son would be remembered not for his controversies or his wealth, but for his refusal to accept limits handed down without question. For his insistence that humanity could do more than survive, that it could aspire. She admitted she did not always understand his choices. There were moments she wished he would choose safety, comfort, quiet. But she said she learned to respect the call he felt, even when it scared her. Loving someone, she suggested, sometimes means letting them walk toward storms you wish you could block. She ended not with advice, but with an observation. She said that the world is hungry for symbols because symbols are easier than people. It is easier to worship or attack an idea than to sit with a complicated human story. She offered her words not as a defense, not as a correction, but as an invitation to see more clearly. In this imagined moment, what changed everything was not a shocking secret or a dramatic revelation. It was the humanization of a figure often flattened by fame. It was the reminder that behind ambition is anxiety, behind innovation is insecurity, behind vision is vulnerability. She did not ask the world to agree with her son. She asked the world to see him, and perhaps, in seeing him more clearly, people might learn to see themselves more clearly too. The drive to build, the fear of stagnation, the tension between love and ambition, the cost of caring deeply about the future. These were not the traits of a distant billionaire alone, they were human traits, magnified by scale, sharpened by circumstance. In this telling, her words did not close the conversation. They opened it. They reminded everyone that no story worth telling fits neatly into headlines. That truth often arrives softly. And that sometimes, when a mother speaks, the world pauses long enough to remember that even those who reach for the stars once learned to walk by falling, standing up, and trying again. She continued, and this time her voice carried something deeper, something that felt less like explanation and more like confession. She spoke about the moments the world never sees, the spaces between headlines where life actually happens. She said there were days when the weight of expectation pressed so heavily on him that even success felt hollow. Achievements stacked up, milestones crossed, yet satisfaction remained elusive because the horizon kept moving. As soon as one impossible thing became real, another impossibility appeared, demanding attention, demanding sacrifice. She revealed that from a very young age, he carried a sense of responsibility that did not belong to a child. Not responsibility imposed by adults, but one born from awareness. He noticed problems others ignored. He asked questions that made people uncomfortable. Why things were the way they were, why progress moved so slowly, why suffering was accepted as normal. That awareness, she said, is both a gift and a burden. Once you see what could be, it becomes painful to accept what is. She spoke about money in a way that dismantled another popular myth. Wealth, she said, was never the destination. It was fuel, nothing more. A tool to accelerate ideas that otherwise would have died in notebooks and late-night conversations. She admitted there were moments she worried the world would misunderstand this. Would assume greed where there was urgency. She watched him pour resources back into projects others called foolish, reckless, impossible. She watched him choose risk again and again, not because he enjoyed danger, but because stagnation felt more dangerous. She described how criticism shaped him in unexpected ways. Not all criticism hardened him. Some of it refined him. Some of it forced him to sharpen his thinking, to defend ideas not with ego but with evidence. Yet some words cut deeper than he admitted. She said he learned to keep moving because stopping meant feeling everything at once, and that was sometimes unbearable. She talked about humor again, this time with a smile that carried sadness beneath it. Humor was not just armor, it was relief. A way to breathe when pressure threatened to suffocate. She said laughter reminded him he was still human in environments that treated him like a machine, a symbol, a solution rather than a person. She revealed that despite the confidence projected to the world, he often questioned whether he was doing enough, whether he was choosing the right battles, whether the sacrifices were justified. Doubt did not paralyze him, but it followed him closely, whispering questions late at night when the noise faded. She said courage is not the absence of doubt, it is action taken in its presence. She spoke about relationships again, more tenderly this time. She said loving someone with a mind always racing toward the future requires patience few people are prepared for. Attention, when divided between worlds to be built and people already present, can feel thin even when the love itself is deep. She acknowledged the pain this caused, the misunderstandings, the sense of always coming second to something invisible but powerful. She did not frame him as a victim or a villain, only as a man still learning. She revealed something that felt especially intimate. She said there were moments when he wished for simplicity, moments when he imagined a quieter life, one where progress did not depend so heavily on his decisions. But those moments passed quickly. Overtaken by the familiar restlessness that refused to let him stay still. The call to build, to push, to attempt what others dismissed, always returned. She spoke about failure again, but this time personally. She said watching her child fail publicly was harder than any private disappointment. The world often forgets that behind public figures are parents who feel every blow. She felt the mockery, the doubt, the glee some took in seeing him stumble. Yet she also witnessed something extraordinary in those moments, his refusal to retreat. He absorbed loss, recalibrated, and stepped forward again, not louder, but more determined. She addressed the idea of destiny, gently dismantling it. There was no prophecy, no inevitable path. There were choices, each one heavy with consequence. He chose uncertainty repeatedly. He chose paths where success was unlikely and criticism guaranteed. She said destiny is often just perseverance misunderstood in hindsight. She revealed that what truly sustained him was not applause or validation, but meaning. The belief that his work mattered beyond himself. That belief acted as an anchor when everything else felt unstable. Without meaning, she said, even the strongest ambition collapses. She spoke of pride, but not the kind the world expects. Her pride was not rooted in fame or influence. It was rooted in resilience. In the way he kept going when it would have been easier to stop. In the way he remained curious rather than cynical. In the way he continued to imagine futures worth striving for, even when the present resisted fiercely. She admitted fear never left her. Mothers do not stop worrying simply because their children grow powerful. She feared burnout, isolation, the toll of carrying too much for too long. She feared a world that takes endlessly but rarely gives back. Yet she also trusted the strength she had seen forged over decades. She spoke about humanity, about her hope that people would look beyond extremes. That they would resist the urge to either idolize or demonize. That they would understand progress is messy, driven by imperfect people making difficult choices without guarantees. She said if there was one thing she wanted people to understand, it was this: behind every bold vision is a human heart that feels deeply, doubts frequently, and hopes stubbornly. Reducing that complexity robs everyone of truth. Her words lingered not because they answered every question, but because they reframed them. They shifted focus from spectacle to substance, from outcome to intention. They reminded listeners that greatness is not a single trait but a constant negotiation between strength and vulnerability, and as she spoke, something subtle happened. The figure so often discussed in absolutes became layered again. Not just a disruptor or a dreamer, not just a lightning rod or a legend, but a person shaped by curiosity, pressure, love, and fear, still moving forward despite never fully knowing where the path would lead. Her voice did not demand agreement. It asked for understanding. And in that quiet request, everything truly began to change. She paused before continuing, as if choosing which truths the world was finally ready to hear and which ones still needed time. Then she spoke again, softer now, almost as if the words were meant for him more than for anyone listening. She said there was something people rarely understood about him. The intensity they see is not ambition alone, it is urgency. A feeling that time is limited, that windows close faster than we expect. She said he has always lived with a heightened awareness of impermanence, not in a fearful way, but in a motivating one. Tomorrow is never guaranteed, so waiting feels irresponsible. This is why he moves quickly, why patience is selective, why delays frustrate him more than obstacles. She revealed that even in moments of celebration, his mind is already elsewhere. Success does not linger long in his thoughts because success, to him, is simply confirmation that the next problem is now solvable. She said joy comes to him not from completion, but from momentum. From knowing that something impossible has shifted into the realm of the possible. She spoke about solitude again, but this time with clarity. Loneliness was not just a side effect of brilliance, it was sometimes a choice. There are paths that narrow as you walk them. The further you go into uncharted territory, the fewer people can follow. She said he accepted this early, though acceptance did not erase the ache entirely. There were moments he wished someone could fully share the burden of knowing too much, seeing too far ahead. She addressed the perception that he does not care what people think. She smiled gently at that. She said caring too much is actually closer to the truth. He cares deeply about outcomes, about impact, about whether his efforts truly help or merely impress. What he learned to release was not concern, but dependence. Depending on approval makes progress fragile. He learned to stand even when misunderstood. She revealed that one of the hardest lessons he learned was restraint. Knowing when not to act. Knowing when an idea, no matter how exciting, needed time rather than force. This did not come naturally. It was learned through costly mistakes, through listening after speaking too quickly, through watching consequences unfold in real time. Growth, she said, did not soften his drive, but it refined it. She spoke about compassion in a way that surprised many. She said his compassion rarely shows up as gentleness. It shows up as problem-solving. If something is broken, his instinct is not to soothe, but to fix. This can feel cold to those who need comfort more than solutions. She acknowledged this tension honestly. Love wears different faces, and his often wears the face of action. She talked about the future with something like reverence. Not as a fantasy, but as a responsibility. She said he sees future generations not as abstract concepts, but as real people who will live with the consequences of today's choices. This is why short-term comfort feels inadequate to him. This is why he accepts criticism today to prevent regret tomorrow. She revealed something deeply personal near the end. She said there were moments he asked her if it was enough. Not enough money, not enough success, but enough effort. Enough sacrifice. Enough time given to things that may never thank him back. She said she never answered with certainty, because certainty would be dishonest. Instead, she reminded him that meaning is not measured in guarantees, but in intention aligned with conscience. She spoke about forgiveness, too. About forgiving himself for the things that did not work, the people he disappointed, the balance he has not yet mastered. She said self-forgiveness was harder for him than public criticism. The mind that solves complex problems can be unforgiving toward its own perceived failures. She said the world often expects heroes to be finished stories. Complete, polished, resolved. But he is still becoming. Still learning where to soften and where to stand firm. Still discovering which battles truly matter. She asked the world to allow him that humanity. As she reached the end, she did not offer a grand conclusion. She offered a quiet truth. That change does not come from flawless people, but from persistent ones. From those willing to be wrong, to be criticized, to be exhausted, and still show up again. She said if people truly listened to her words, they might stop asking whether he is good or bad, genius or reckless, savior or villain. Those questions are too small. The real question, she suggested, is whether humanity is willing to wrestle with complexity, or whether it will continue to demand simplicity from a world that no longer allows it. She looked forward, not backward. She said the story is not finished. It never is. What matters is not how loudly someone is discussed, but whether their efforts push the collective imagination forward, even slightly, and in that imagined final moment. What truly changed everything was not a revelation about him, but a revelation about us. Our need to label, to reduce, to judge from a distance. Her words asked for something braver, understanding without agreement, curiosity without worship, criticism without cruelty. When she finished, there was no dramatic silence, no applause demanded by the moment. Just a lingering sense that something had shifted. That a figure often seen as larger than life had been gently returned to human scale. Not small.